All right, so let us get started. So there we go. So thanks everyone for coming. This is the second event in our anti-racism series. This is a page that we're using for resources. You can see what is on the page. I'm not going to read everything, but basically the purpose of the event is to start the discussion about race in America. And to that end, we have the resources and we have programs. I see the first program was on Monday night, and we've recorded that, so you can watch. And we are recording this, so once that is done, we'll put that up there, and you'll be able to. Anybody who missed this, they will be sad, but now they will be able to see it afterwards. So I just want a couple of housekeeping things, I guess. So this is the like I said, the second event in the series. On Friday there will be a documentary talk. So we're going to watch "I Am Not Your Negro" beforehand because we don't have the broadcast rights to actually show it. And if you want to register for that, you can go to this page here, which I will put in the chat, and register for that event and come talk about it. Next month, we have another book that we're reading. We weren't able to get the author, but it is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Aluo. Hope I said that right. But anyway, so that is later. For now, I want to say the series is made so much better because we were able to get Dolores to speak. We're pleased to be able to step out of get our white selves out of the way and get a person of color to speak of it. So what's going to happen is Dolores will read a passage, and then I will ask her some questions, and then we will open it up to you. On the bottom of the screen, you will see, you'll see a Q&A section and a chat section. Please keep your comments to the Q&A section so I can tell who asked what when, and pass along those to Dolores in order. The chat section you can use for such things as telling us, how great we are and how great Dolores is. So with that, I will give you a quick bio of Dolores and then turn it over to her. So Dolores was born in Buffalo, New York. She earned degrees from Harvard University and Harvard Graduate School of Business. After a career in tech, she took an MFA equivalent course to learn creative writing. She's a published essayist and is focused on interracialism. She has an ALA Star Review. She won the Outstanding Literary Award from the National Association for Black Journalists. The Globe. She was on the Globe Summer Reading List, and she was on the Black Lives Matters Powell Bookstore reading list. So quite a bit. So Dolores, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you to the Wilmington Library and to you, Brad, for having me. And thanks to all the people who joined us tonight. I'm going to do a short reading. And in this scene, my Black father and white mother tell us, their adult children, for the very first time, how they did the unthinkable in 1942 Indianapolis. So here goes. The Negro cabbie asked Ella twice if she was sure of the address, if she wanted the colored side of town. She assured him she did. And when the cab pulled up at his place, Charles was waiting on the sidewalk. As he helped her out, the cabbie turned all the way around to glare at Charles. "Man, why you want to mix me up in something like this?" "Just take the dollar," Charles said. "You haven't seen a thing, understand?" She went into his room at the boarding house and sat in the nicked easy chair as Charles fixed the Coke she asked for, adding a splash of whiskey before pouring a straight one for himself. She raised her glass and made a toast the boys at her acting group had taught her. "Here's to it and to it again. If you don't do it when you get to it, you'll never get to it to do it again." He laughed. How he liked the life in her eyes and the spirit in her soul. Without it, he realized she would never have come here to be with him. Charles turned on the radio to a moody blues tune. Then a color announcer came on. "Hey, all you cats out there, it's Saturday night. Get your best girl and cut a rug with us, where the party keeps it going all night long." He pulled her up to dance, though she protested that she wasn't much good. Ella Fitzgerald was on, and while they tried, neither could follow what the other was doing. She knew the foxtrot with its set patterns, and he knew the country mule. They laughed through false turns and stepping on each other's toes, but when a slow tune came on, they did better. Charles folded her into his chest, and she followed his simple steps. In no time, they were cooking dinner together at his place a couple of nights a week. But as they grew into love, Charles began to worry. He didn't think she understood the trouble she could get in for being with him. Did this white girl even know she could be attacked in the street for it? Did she have any idea of what she could face for breaking the unwritten Jim Crow code? Some of the Indianapolis and Marion County elected officials were open members of the Klan. They posed as good guys, doing community service like giving away free wheelchairs and food to whites only. But did Ella understand that the Grand Wizard, a man named Stevenson, used to run the nationwide Ku Klux from Indianapolis? That they hated Negroes so much that they terrorized and killed them? She didn't. 2 Negro men got lynched in Marion, Indiana, a few years before he and Ella took up. After a robbery and a murder, a white woman claimed rape. The suspected men were locked up briefly until a white mob broke into the jail with sledgehammers and strung them up. Charles saw a picture postcard of the lynching taped up next to the price list at the black barber shop. On it, a big crowd of men and women milled around the brown bodies hanging from trees, their white faces satisfied. The victims' heads bent over their nooses, where their necks had broken, their limp legs dangling free. Their bodies were left on display as whites congratulated themselves on delivering vigilante justice. That was the proof, the man in the next barber shirt told Charles, of how the Klan was the law in Indianapolis. Don't take no chances in these parts, he said. Nobody has been called to account. As happened at many lynchings, studio photographers shot a ghastly picture, then sold thousands of copies, like circus souvenirs, to white people who wanted a keepsake. Charles sat Ella down to explain how it was. Somebody could get the law on him because of their relationship, trump up the charges, throw him in jail, beat him half to death, or lynch him for touching a white woman, and nobody would do a thing about it, the way it happened to those boys. He was getting pretty scared, and she should be too. Ella had to understand that for her part, the place where they both worked would fire her if they found out. It would be a scandal, and all white people would turn their backs on her. My brother David wiped his brow with a handkerchief that he always carried and asked incredulously, "You mean this was the first you heard of any of this, Mama? How could you not know?" My life had only been in the white community up to then, Mama said. I was completely sheltered from that kind of thing. Negro business wasn't my business, nor anyone's I knew. My family didn't follow politics or race, or even if they had, a lynching wasn't anything to talk to a young lady about. When your father explained all this to me, I had only the slightest idea. Charles wanted Ella to think these risks through before they saw each other again. She had to decide if the risks were worth it. Could she live with her family never knowing about them? Could she live with staying alert all the time so they never made that one mistake that would ruin their lives? He took Ella by the shoulders and finally said he loved her so much he was willing to face the dangers. Charles's forehead sweat and his voice dropped deep with desperation when he said he had to be sure she loved him the same way. He pulled her close and stroked her thick curls. Take some time to think hard before you answer me, he said. I mean it. And if you don't come back, I'll understand. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was tough, but good, right? Yeah, that's the truth. Before I read The Warmth of Other Suns about the Great Migration last year, and then reading your book, I just seems like that happened in the North, and I didn't know. You know, I mean, it's very isolated. So thank you. So let's get to some questions, huh? So, as you said, your black father and your white mother fell in love in 1943 in Indiana. How did they, when anti-miscegenation laws made the relationship illegal, what exactly were they up against legally and socially if they got caught?
So anti-miscegenation laws originated in Virginia and at one time existed in 28 states in America. The word miscegenation means mixing. And that was the law in Indiana. If they were caught together, they faced prison terms up to 7 years at hard labor, both the man and the woman. And there was the Klan running the city council. The atmosphere in Indiana was quite racist. As demonstrated in that reading, the lynching of those two men was done with impunity. They were taken from the courthouse, and lynched, and nobody did a thing about it. There was never any inquiry, and that's what my father was worried about. He wanted my mother to really understand that what they were doing was dangerous. And he, being the black man in this union, faced the most violence. He could be killed. He could be killed for what they were doing. And so he talked my mom into, once she said that she did want to marry him, she did want to take the risks that he described, he told her there's no way they could stay in Indianapolis, because surely he'd be dead, she'd be in prison, and the consequences were some that they didn't want to live with. And so they decided to run away. And what happened was my mom staged her own disappearance. She told her family that she was going to go visit an old classmate in Massachusetts. And her father, who was kind of against her traveling on her own, was talked into it, and he put her on the train and they waved a cheerful goodbye. And she said she'd see them in a few weeks or days, and disappeared into thin air. My father had already gone ahead, and he was in Buffalo. And my mom took a train across several states from Indiana and she got off in New York City, where she spent the night and later transferred to another train and went on to Buffalo. So when she disappeared, the police in Indianapolis started looking for her, and then the FBI got involved because she had traveled across several states. So that was interstate commerce. And my mom had sent a postcard to her family from the hotel where she spent the night in New York City. So they thought she must be in New York. And the detectives in New York City became involved with all these different police departments and the FBI searching for her. They couldn't find my mother. Nobody knew that she even knew my dad or that they were in any way involved. And so his disappearance didn't trigger any inquiries. And my grandfather, my white grandfather, was called into the New York City detectives' offices where all the authorities had conferred, and they informed him that they were closing her case and labeling it a victim of foul play, which meant even though they didn't have a body, they thought that she was either murdered or sold into white slavery. That's what her family lived with. while she and my dad lived in hiding for the next 36 years.
It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah, and that's the price that people had to pay if they
Yeah.
wanted to marry across the color line
Yeah.
in the 40s.
Not a small price for any means. All right. So you mentioned this too. Your mother hadn't known anything about the consequences of intermarriage. She explained that in her family and community, Negro business wasn't their business. How does that relate to white people in today's racial reckoning who now want to understand the Black experience?
So today we have a lot of white people who were out demonstrating in the recent protests, and many more in corporations and neighborhoods and churches and everywhere, saying we want to get involved in this injustice, but we really don't know much about it. And we don't understand what Black people have gone through. What we find out is pretty horrific, and what can we do? And to my mind, that is almost the same conversation my mom had with her family. She's saying, gee, I lived in this all-white neighborhood, and we went to an all-white church. Her family was Catholic, and most of what they did socially was with that Catholic community. They never went to the other side of town. They never went to their Roxbury. They didn't know any Black people. They didn't have any personal relationships with any Black people. And so they were living in one world, and Black people were living in another world. And that's kind of how it looks today.
Yeah.
From 1940 to now is what, 80 years?
Yeah.
And we have pretty much the same situations, but thankfully people now today are trying to find out what is the situation and how can I help correct it.
Yeah, yeah. It's been when we were planning this program, it was for those reasons, and we were having a good problem. We were having problems getting books by Black authors because everybody wanted it. So it was a good problem to have.
Good. Well, yes, right. I'm glad that the library is stocking more books, and there are actually a lot of books out there by Black authors. And if you look at that Powell's list, they've got 100 books on that list.
100. Oh, nice. There you go.
On their Black Lives Matter reading list.
That's awesome. That's good.
Up in Wilmington.
Yeah. We'll have to have a checklist. See how many of the 100 we can get. Right. So your parents fled in secret to New York State to legally marry, and then disappeared, as you said, for 36 years. Yet Sam Dead describes another kind of racism you live with from both Black and white people there. Can you tell us a couple of about a couple of those situations?
Sure. So my family was really an outlier. There were so few interracial people in those days. And, racism had been quite rampant through the 40s during Jim Crow, when we had these unwritten rules that followed Reconstruction that recreated all of the barriers for Black people's advancement. And so the idea of marrying across the color line was pretty much unheard of. There were some people in show business that had done it, but the common person hadn't seen it much. And so our mixed race family got it from everybody. We had the racism of being Black people, and we had the racism of being mixed race people. Everybody was upset about us. What I can tell you is that the Pew Research Center did a national survey about race mixing in 1958. So my parents had already been married for 15 years, and I was 10 years old in 1958. The results were that 96% of Americans said race mixing was wrong. Now, just to follow that thread for a moment, there have been additional surveys over the years. In 1967, when the Supreme Court abolished all those anti-miscegenation laws, 72% of Americans were against race mixing. And as we go through the years, we see that numbers start to decline further, so that around 2007 or so is the last study I saw where 77% of Americans said they didn't mind if somebody in their family married across the color line. So it has changed. But to go back to the actual question that you asked me about the racism that we faced, I'll give you two examples. One was our family was out at a county park having a picnic. And my older brother had gone on a little hike and gotten into a wasp's nest. And he came screaming back to the picnic site. The wasps had stung him all over. And he's rolling around on the ground. He's hysterical. And my mom is trying to get those stingers out without much luck. And a white woman is crossing by to go to the facilities, and she comes over and very graciously gets involved, and she makes these mud packs and puts them around the stingers, and she's able to pull them out as easy as she could pull a toothpick out of a freshly baked cake. And so my brother calms down and he's comforted, and then my dad comes out from the shed where he was barbecuing. He comes over and he puts his arm around my brother and he's comforting him. And the woman stops and she looks from my mother to my father. And this look comes over her face and her hand flies up to her mouth. She can't believe what she's looking at, and she starts to run.
Oh my God.
She's in the Olympics, as if the wasps were after her. And that's how white people acted. But let me tell you another anecdote. There was a convention coming to Buffalo where we lived, and it was a Black association. So the word was out that because Black people were not allowed to stay in the hotels, again, this is New York State, in the North, discrimination existed as well. So the word was out that if you would put these conventioneers up in your home for room and board, you would be paid. And my mom was really excited about that. She wanted to get the money to pay the Catholic school tuition for my oldest brother. So she's scrubbing in the corners with toothbrush and cooking all the great food and getting everything ready. So when the people arrive, my dad goes out to greet them, and he brings the suitcase in to the living room, and he calls my mom to come from the kitchen. And when she does, the Black wife says, "Who is this?" And he says, "It's my wife, Ella." And the woman starts shaking her head. She says, "Somebody should have told us about this." She's very angry. And she tells her husband, "Take the suitcase out. We're not going to stay here looking at this Black man and his white trash woman. That's going to ruin our vacation." And they left. So my dad used to call this equal opportunity racism. Everybody, expressing racism.
Didn't matter which direction, huh?
We were in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. So how did it affect you and your family when the Supreme Court overturned anti-miscegenation laws?
So I was a 19-year-old student at Howard University, and that university has been in the news. It's where Kamala Harris went. It's a historically Black college. And so I'm walking across the quad, and this boy that I vaguely knew is coming the other direction, he comes over and he starts shaking my hand, congratulating me and laughing and laughing. And I say to him, "Congratulations for what?" He says, "You're no longer a bastard. Today, the Supreme Court overturned all those laws, and now you're legal." And I say to him, "You don't know what you're talking about. My parents were married legitimately in New York State." And so I go running over to the library to find the New York Times and read about what he's saying. And there is a list of the 15 states whose laws were overturned by the Supreme Court. And New York State was not on there. So I'm thinking, this has nothing to do with me. Later on, of course, in my life, decades later, I found out it had everything to do with me.
Sure. So speaking of Howard University, you grew up Black and attended Howard University. How did your experience of the Black Mecca shape your identity and perspective on race?
So when I arrived at Howard and went to the freshman orientation, which was given by the president, I found out that he was on the legal team that litigated Brown versus Board of Education, that desegregated schools in America, and that Thurgood Marshall, who was elevated to the Supreme Court and had also litigated that case, was the dean of the law school. And I quickly realized that I was in the midst of the Black intelligentsia of America, the civil rights leadership. And what the president said to us was, you have been selected to come here as the talented 10th of the race. That means that you are not here only to educate yourself, but to help raise the race. That means that each of you who graduate from here is being bestowed a mantle of responsibility to make sure that you do everything in your power with your education and your success to bring up the Black race. And that has ordered my footsteps ever since.
All right. So moving after your university time, you and your Black husband moved to Baton Rouge for work, ignoring your father's warning about the Deep South. There you faced persistent and sometimes dangerous racism. Can you tell a little bit about what happened?
Well, my father told us, because he was raised in Georgia, and he and his family, quote, escaped from Georgia in the 1930s to go up to Buffalo, that I had no understanding of the South. Having been raised in New York State, I didn't understand even the difference between the South and the Deep South. The Deep South were probably the biggest plantation states and the most adamant racist. And the history lingered. That's what my father was trying to tell me. He said racism is alive and well in the United States and in the Deep South, in Louisiana. It's right next to Mississippi, which has always been known as the most racist place in the country. But we argued, my husband and I, that we had these great new jobs. Both of us were moving up. And anyway, they had passed the civil rights laws a decade before. And so everything was fixed. And I was 26 when I made that foolish statement, and I went to Louisiana. When I got there, there were a number of racist incidents that happened right away. When I went to work the first day, an older man came by my desk and told me a nigger joke to my face. Then I went to a management dinner that evening, my first day at work, where a white management person told a story, an ugly story about Black customers. At which time I got up and walked out. And I told my boss, I wasn't going to sit there and take that, and he said, but she didn't know you were white. I mean, she didn't know you were Black. She thought you were white. Because a lot of people do think that when they look at me. Mm. But I said, this is not an environment where I can work. So you're going to have to do something about it. So he called that woman and made her apologize. And she said to me, if I had known you were Black, I would have never said that. But I now must say to the audience, that was only the first of many, many situations where white people have said derogatory things about Black people to me, thinking I was one of them. And it has revealed the casual racism that goes on every day in America, where people feel like they can stand in a supermarket line and say to any white stranger whatever disparaging thing they want, and nobody's going to take issue with it. That tells me how deeply bias exists in this country. When people don't want to admit it, it does. But let me go back to Baton Rouge and say that the biggest incident was that we had a cross burned on our lawn shortly after we bought a house. And when we called the police, they came out, and similar to what we have seen recently with police behavior, we found out that they didn't care about us. The police officers came, they were told to fan out through the neighborhood and see if they could find any suspects. And when they came back, the person in charge came and said, "You must be some good niggers because nobody wants to make a complaint against you."
Wow.
The theory, I guess, being that somehow we had provoked people to the extent that they had to retaliate against us. But the provoking was the fact that we bought a house and moved in.
Yeah.
But, you know, we believed that with equal access civil rights laws having been passed, that was fine. We could do that. But we were from the North. And the racism persisted in Louisiana. My husband had a lupus attack very shortly after that cross burning incident. We were scared because people kept coming back and doing stuff, throwing lit firecrackers in our face and, you know, other threatening things. And the police never did anything. So he went to the hospital at the doctor's instructions to be admitted, but he was left laying on a gurney in the hall for hours and hours. And when I inquired as to when he would have his room, the woman never even looked in my face. She simply said, "Well, the beds upstairs are not for Black men. They're in rooms with white men." So he was not allowed to have a bed because he would have to share a room with a white man. This just went on and on. We got out of Louisiana.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the prologue of your book, I think, that you mentioned that you pulled into a gas station and the attendant kind of looked at you and he didn't know what to make of you. And then like he asked you what you were, like he was offended because he couldn't place you. It's just, it's mind boggling, really.
I want to say that that's been a continuing theme in my life.
I'm sorry.
Everybody everywhere has taken the liberty of walking up to me. They don't know me, but they just have to know, what are you? They're right in my face. And, you know, I find that like peering at a public statue or a museum exhibit, like that you can just, you know, look at my features. And because that gas station man was only one example of the many people who have asked me that question and just persist and persist. He said, "Well, are you Spanish? He said, Italian? Are you Jewish, you know, all of this." Now, when somebody does that to me, and they still do, I say I'm from Madagascar. Nobody knows where that is or what that means, so they just move along, which is my wish.
There you go. Everybody wins. Go away. So carry that a little further. You write about your journey to understand your light skin privilege as a Black woman. How do you see that?
So it's very interesting. For years, Black people would tell me, "Well, you got a promotion or you got a raise or this or that happened for you because you're so light." And I would say, "No, you know, it's based on merit. I worked for this," and so on. And it occurred to me that in many instances, white people find me more acceptable than dark people. And that seems to be because they can identify a little more with me. I look like a relative or a neighbor or somebody they went to school with. And the darker you are in America, the more threatening people find you. And I can attest to many of the Black people that I know who are darker having a much rougher ride than I do. And that is called colorism. There are actually studies in academia that show that in a classroom where there are children of color, the lightest ones are more likely to become the teacher's pet, the one that gets the extra help, the recommendation for the job, than the darker kids.
You put it in the book, the spectrum. What was it? Chalked coal, the spectrum. I thought that was great. That was a great way to.
The color spectrum of Black people is from chalk to charcoal.
Charcoal, yeah.
Yeah, and that comes, let me point out to you, from the origin of mixed race in America, slavery.
Uh,
Because people didn't come from Africa looking like me,
right.
or light brown, or cinnamon colored. They came looking charcoal and blue black. And on the plantations, the import of Africans into slavery here was stopped in the 1820s. But slavery persisted, and the numbers grew. Why? Because it was free labor. The United States wealth was built on free labor. And if your labor force is dwindling, you have to do something about that. And so the plantation masters were raping the Black women on the plantations over and over in order to what? Produce more slaves. So when you look at Black people and all the different shades that they are, you are looking at the product of slavery.
Yeah. So when you went down to Alabama to meet your great aunt Willie, and you find out more about your Black father's roots, what were some of the revelations that came from that visit, and how did it form your identity or inform your identity?
Well, my great aunt Willie was going to show me some photographs and kind of tell me who all these people were I'd heard of, but I didn't know how they were related. And we end up, taking this dress box of pictures from under her bed and laying them out on her dining room table in rows representing generations. And when she comes across a picture of my grandmother, and she says, look at that. You and your grandmother are spitting image of each other. You know, you both have that white side. And I said, you're what white side? Of course, I know I'm half white. And she said, they didn't tell you? Your grandmother is half white. But nobody had ever said anything about it. I said, well, no, I don't know. And she said, well, see, her mom was raped on the plantation. Repeatedly, she was a ripe young girl, about 14 or 15. And the white man on that plantation, where all of the ancestors were slaves, repeatedly raped her. And your grandmother came from that union. So I said, well, she must have been ashamed. That's why she didn't tell me. And she said, no. She had nothing to be ashamed of because that's what white men have done to Black women, and we could do nothing about it. So when I went back home, I asked my grandmother, did you know your dad? She said, if you want to call him that. I did, yeah. He came by our house every blue moon with a little bag of candy, and he'd sit me on his lap. And after he crossed over that porch, we knew very well we were never to acknowledge him in any way as a relative. She said he was no father to me. The other thing that happened at Aunt Willie's was I created this genealogy chart from all the notes and the pictures that she gave me. And once it was all typed up and presented, I looked at that thing and I saw that this is for the first time, and I'm an adult, it dawns on me, my mother is my whole white family all by herself. She has no branches, and I know that can't be right. She has to come from somebody somewhere, but who?
Yeah.
That sent me back to Buffalo to talk to my family about that.
So with so many racist incidents in your life, so why did you go back to find the missing white family, the people who you didn't even know existed?
My identity was tilted once I looked at that genealogy chart and I saw that half of my family tree was missing. There was a mystery there, and there was this, I'd been raised as a Black person and married a Black person and gone to a Black university. And now my mom's whiteness, which was always subordinated because of all the prejudice, becomes an issue for me. Like, whose blood is in my vein? What kind of people do I come from? It's the question that the 30 million people signed up for Ancestry.com want to know. And so I decided to go and look for my mother's family.
What was your family's reaction to your decision to do that?
It was not good. When I went home and all my family was gathered together, my mom fixed our favorite meal, and it was a Saturday night. We were back home with my parents, all of us adults now. I said that half of our family was missing, and they all looked at me so quizzically. And I said, well, half of our white family is missing. Mama's family, we don't even know who they are. And my mom made this noise like wind rushing through a crack in a door. And she was so upset, my father took her upstairs to talk. And I could hear her crying, and he's talking, and it took them about an hour before they came back. And they said, look, because you're adults, we will tell you now that we ran away. My mother raised her chin very defiantly. She said, I ran away to marry your father, and I never meant for my family to find me. And they never did. She was kind of proud of herself. And we talked about me wanting to go back to find these people. And my mother said, no, I don't want anything to do with that. I've been gone for 36 years. They're going to hate me for what I did. I'd never face them again. And I said, but I want to do this for my own reasons. And so what if I just go out and find them, and I don't say, I don't involve you in this in any way? And she said, well, okay, if you want to do it that way. And I said, well, then what am I supposed to say about you? And she said, say I'm dead, which is the title of the book.
Yes. So what did you find? What did you find when you searched for your white family?
Well, I searched and searched with shoe leather and paper and pencil, because this was back in the 70s. And at the end of a week, I had almost no information except that my grandfather and grandmother had died. And my mom had said to me, when you get out there, memorize Dad's face, everything about him, and come back and tell me. And when I arrived there, he had been dead for 30 years. Oh. And I looked for my aunt, her sister, and I could find nothing. No marriage license, no house where they used to live. Had been torn down, and nobody in the phone book that I called was her. And I had called the priest where they went to church and left him a lot of messages. When I got to the airport to go home empty-handed, I called that priest one more time, and he said, oh, I have the marriage certificate. Your aunt was married here in the church, which is what I had thought I would find. And he gave me the name of the man that she married. I looked in the phone book, and it was there.
Nice.
So I called there, and sure enough, that was her. I was at the airport, and she said to me, stay there, I'm coming. And she came up this concourse. This is way before TSA, when everybody could walk all over the airport. And she kind of staggered right up to me. And she didn't know what I looked like. She didn't ask me, where are you, or what airline, nothing. And she got right into my space, and she said, it's you, isn't it? I see my sister in your face. Very, very eerie.
Yeah.
So we had about an hour to talk. And I told her that her sister had married a Black man and why they had run, and not told her family. And she stirred this coffee for the longest while. And finally she looked up and she said, yeah, they were probably right to do that. Mm. So she said to me, well, where's my sister now? And loyal to the promise I made my mother, I told her she was dead. Mm-hmm. I left there and got on the plane feeling pretty sick to my stomach that I had met this woman, because what she said to me was, all these years we could have been together, we wasted. And now she's dead. And I'm thinking, well, I got to go home and work on my mother.
Yeah. So, did your mother ever reunite with her family?
After a lot of crying and gnashing of teeth, she did. And I took my mom out to Indianapolis, and we stayed a week in her sister's and husband's home. Met all of the family, the cousins and the nieces and nephews and the in-laws, and everybody were so welcoming. It was really amazing that when she returned to that place that was so racist, the family said, "We care about family love and not race. And we love you. We love all of your family. We love your Black husband." And that is the end of the story. They had 26 years together after that, two sisters.
That's great. I'm actually going to ask one of the questions from the Q&A because it dovetails here. So when you went to, I'm going to read it because it's from Taylor, and it's really nice at the end. So when you brought your mom to visit Dorothy and her family, you made a direct inquiry to Dorothy about her opinion on race and how she felt about you and your siblings and father being Black. It was a vulnerable conversation. You anticipated a bias on their part and also had your own about their potential response. Taylor says I was moved by the humanity and the honesty of that experience.
Thank you, Taylor. Thanks for that question. You know, that was very tenuous for me and for all of us, because while we had that visit together, that first visit, I still had fears that maybe I was just escorting my mom back to her sister. I wasn't really being seen as a true member of the family. And so near the end of the week, I brought that up. And I said, we haven't really talked about race, and I think we should. I think this is relevant for today when so many people are saying, how do I talk about race? Because I said what was really on my heart. What about my Black dad? What about my Black husband? I wanted to be sure that this was for everybody and not just for my mom. And it really brought out the love, the possible love that was on the table after all those years of separation. And I had had a fitful night before I brought this conversation out. And that was that there's a passage in the book where I talk about my boogeyman. And having had so many racist experiences in my life, I wasn't able to really come to terms with the thought that white people were always out to get us. There was some microaggression, some violence, some denial of opportunity around every corner, because it had been my experience. And that was my boogeyman. He's sitting on my shoulder all those 30 some years telling me, watch out, don't trust what you see, make sure you're safe. And I had to have that conversation with the white family, because I knew that accepting the love that they put on the table meant I had to put my lifelong boogeyman out. And so it was on all sides that we had to cope honestly together with race. I wish America could sit down and have those frank, vulnerable conversations to know each other, to understand what each one is saying, to try to build a future together and not stay in our cocoons where we've lived most of our lives without those cross-racial friendships and relationships.
Yeah, I've always been one not to talk up in school, but the more like divisive America gets, the more I'm convinced that like debate should be a required class in school, because these are uncomfortable topics to have conversations about, but they're needed because you need to know where people stand without vilifying them. It's yes. Hard.
It's a very hard, difficult middle ground to try to build, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
In order to have one nation one nation. And the book that you mentioned, So You Want to Talk About Race, is a really good choice because there she tells you some things to do to stimulate those conversations and make a safe space where people can actually talk about the things that they're afraid to bring up.
Yeah. Good to know we're on the right track. Going into the future, I guess we could say, is what is the outlook for mixed race people in America today, in your opinion?
Well, the ground is still not entirely secure. There's some people who can't abide the notion yet, although the tide has turned, as I was telling you earlier, from the 96% of Americans in 1958 who thought race mixing was wrong to 77% of Americans saying, okay, if somebody, we've all had a cousin who brought somebody from another tribe to Thanksgiving dinner, or seen a kid in our children's class, or a family in a pew ahead of us in church that is mixed race. It's, we've had Barack Obama and Meghan Markle, and we have all of these celebrities. We have Drake and Alicia Keys and Derek Jeter and all of these mixed race people. It's not like when I was a kid and everybody had to stop and gawk and make a dirty remark. And so we're on an upward trajectory. And I think that's a moment of hope. Mixed race is a slice of the racial picture in America. It's not the whole story. But in the 2010 census, it was reported that the growth rate in the birth of mixed race children was 3 times the rate in the growth of single race children. That 1 in 10 marriages was mixed race. That's all races marrying all races. So you can have a Japanese marrying a white person, or a Black person marrying a Chinese, or whatever, all together. And in 2015, Pew Research reported that 1 in 10 marriages in this country are mixed race.
Wow.
The Census Bureau has a graph that projects the future of the mixed race phenomena and says that by 2050, so mid-century, America will have a 20% mixed race population. That's bigger than the Hispanic population is today in America. So as we move forward, the demographics are changing and the attitudes are changing. And while this is not the cure-all of our racial strife, it is a ray of hope.
Yes. So how do you see this growth in mixed racing in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, I have an 18-month-old mixed race grandson. And frankly, even though he has my coloring, so he will enjoy light skin privilege, and he has educated parents, so he will live a good quality life, I worry that he's a Black boy in America. Black Lives Matter is a very important movement and concept for all to keep in mind if we ever want to see the end of the trouble.
That's great. That's great. So that's all I have. So I do have a list of questions from the audience. So here we go. Do you think racism has changed in Massachusetts since when you came here for your MBA? What would you like to see change?
Of course, when I came here for my MBA, Boston was desegregating schools, and that was ugly. And I was told, don't go to certain neighborhoods or towns because Black people are unwelcome and will be completely mistreated. You don't want to go there for any reason. I don't hear that now. But then the Boston Globe reported in 2018 a series on race that ran for 7 straight days. And it was reported that Boston is labeled the most racist city in America. And to illustrate that point, there was a study of economics that showed that the average net worth of a Black Boston family is only $8, while the average net worth of a white Boston family is more than $240,000. So when we talk about opportunity, we look at all the segregated housing we have. Look at all of the pure white neighborhoods that we have, with maybe a sprinkling of a few people of color, East Indians or Filipinos or Hispanics or a few Blacks. Look at all of that segregation that we still have in Massachusetts. I think it's better than when I got here, but it's not fixed.
It's a big problem, takes a long time to change. So another one we have is, with your experience in marketing and business, what kinds of conversations would you like to see happen in corporate environments?
Well, having been in corporations, I actually consulted with a number on diversity issues over many years. I've also consulted with universities and think tanks on diversity issues. And the unfortunate thing that I have heard all of these years is diversity is sort of an extra consideration that we can only think about when times are good. Like it's extra money and effort. It's sort of a pet project that some people have that really doesn't mean anything to our business. That's, I had a CEO of a large software company tell me that if they hired Black people at higher levels in the company, they'd have to send them to some special education program so they could keep up. He's telling that to a Black Harvard MBA. I've heard that kind of thing from the people in power for way too long. So what I'd like for corporations to do is to make themselves a set of measurable goals for bringing in people of color, especially Black people, onto their boards to oversee the management of the entire place and to set goals, ambitious goals for hiring not people in the cafeteria or the cleaning crew, but in the executive suite, in senior management, in middle management, not in entry-level jobs where they're just being paid something low and being given some job. Let's get some people who really understand the potential of diversity, who believe in it, and who will actively be responsible and accountable for seeing that happen. For training programs, for recruitment programs from Black colleges, there are a lot of amazing graduates coming out of Black colleges. They need to get on that radar and start recruiting those young candidates. There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, for sure. Are you encouraged by all of the statements that have been coming out recently from corporations and sports leagues and stuff like that? I mean, everybody seems to be making a Black Lives Matter is important statement. So are you encouraged by that, or do you feel that it falls too often to just lip service?
Yeah, I'm sort of impressed.
Fair enough.
I think that the the donations and the good words on the website and all that are a visible sign of interest. But what interest is that? Is it in their own interest because they don't want to be left out of and looking like a disconnected corporation? Yeah. What I want to see is action, because even this conversation is only awareness.
Right.
Awareness doesn't make anything change. You have to do something. You have to act. You have to be invested. And you have to personally sacrifice. Those companies have to take some resources from somewhere in order to make these change, build in the oversight and the extra recruiting, and individuals have to say to themselves, in my neighborhood, what can I do? I lived in Andover, and there was no Martin Luther King program when my daughter was in school there. And I went to see the teacher, and she said to me, well, nobody gave me any material. I'm saying The libraries and the school system and the teachers need to get busy. When they put on a play, how about having something about slavery? How about doing a Raisin in the Sun to show what the Black experience it is? How can you possibly have a national holiday to honor civil rights and have nothing to say to the children about it? Come on, people.
Yeah, action.
How about voting for some affordable units to go up in your town?
Yeah, sure. That's great. Oh, that's great. So moving, I guess, back to your family here. So this is from Eileen. First off, she wants to say how much she enjoyed your book, a gripping memoir and a thrilling resolution to such a difficult situation. And I would wholeheartedly agree. And so she wants, can you please tell the people here about your mom's situation before she met your dad, about the impact of her divorce on her future? This is also something that's changed since those days, thankfully so. And she says, thank you so much for the memoir. I'm so happy for you and your family. Best wishes.
That's very nice. Very sweet. Thank you, Eileen. Well, my mom, as I told you earlier, was raised Catholic, and her family was invested in the Catholic community. That was their social circle. And my mom had been engaged to a young man from her parish, but he had a motorcycle and drank beer, and her mother wasn't having it. She made them break off the engagement. And then my mom was single for a long time, and the parents were pushing her to marry another young man from the parish because he was still single and she was still single. I think she might have been 26, which was well into old maid territory back in the 30s. And so they were friends and they thought they could make it, but he turned out, after they married, to be a philanderer, and his family had built this facade that, they gave him money to take her out on dates and so forth. And then she found out that he didn't have a job and he didn't want a job. And when he propositioned her sister, she divorced him. Now, that was completely taboo. Imagine in the 1930s, a woman divorcing a man. Mm. In Catholicism, it's against the church's tenets for you to get a divorce. And after that, she was sort of a persona non grata. What upstanding Catholic white man was going to marry my mother? Nobody. Right. She was a scandal. But she still wanted to get married and have a family. And so, she was looking for somebody when she met my dad. And she said that she had heard all these bad things about Negroes. They were murderers and they beat their wives and they were lazy, they were shiftless and dirty and all that. She said, and then she was the mail clerk at this company where my dad was the handyman. He comes down there to build the shelves for her to put all the boxes and whatnot. And he's so well groomed and well spoken and polite and good at his job. And she's like, what are these people talking about? None of that is true here. So they started to date.
All right. So we have another one here. So I've lived in Wilmington my whole life, and I have two daughters in their 20s who are very passionate about supporting the Black Lives Matter. Honestly, what is the best way for them and me to do something and be genuine? I think you talked about this with the action. And she further says that we truly want to be supportive, acknowledge the importance, and just want to do it the right way. So I think that like I said earlier, you said action is a little bit more. Do you have anything else to say about like what can we do to be productive allies?
Yes, I do have. There's, to me, the building the relationships and crossing over the line and reaching out is so important. Can you find some minority children maybe in Lawrence or another area that you could mentor, that you could tutor? If a person has small children, or school-age children, can you find minority children for them to play with? If there's kids in your school, invite them over. Have them over for dinner. Let them sleep over in your house. Let your kids sleep in their house. Find a Black dentist, find a Black accountant, find a Black doctor, find a Black speech therapist, social worker. Start to involve Black people in your lives. That is how you learn and grow. Come down to Roxbury and Mattapan. There's a lot of get out the vote activity going on in the Black neighborhoods. Come down, join the NAACP. In Merrimack Valley, there is an active NAACP chapter. They would welcome your participation. There are so many things that you can do if you come out of your white community and reach across the line.
Fantastic. Actionable steps are always helpful. I guess changing gears here, when did you decide to write down your story, you and your family's story?
You know, I had a tech career for almost 40 years. And after my family got reunited, we talked for years and years and years about what had happened. And all the while I was collecting information. I had done the genealogy. I actually worked in a place where there were some investigative journalists at one time, and they taught me how to do research. That's how I was able to get the information about the Klan and the lynching in Louisiana. That's how I was able to find the maps of the plantation in Georgia where my family were slaves. All of this was accumulating over a period of time. And when I was working with those journalists, I was able to sit in on some writing classes that they were doing, which were called narrative journalism. And that means now, if you read a story in the newspaper or a magazine, they don't just tell you the facts. You know, yesterday there was a fire at this address and 32 people were put out. They tell you how big the fire was. They tell you how many firemen came and what the blaze looked like and how many people were displaced and how many little children and what they're age. This is to paint a story around the facts so that you relate more and see more what happened. And as I learned that technique, I thought, oh, maybe I could try to write my story using all this research and all these interviews I did with people. And that was actually around 2007. And I quickly found out that I didn't know what I was doing. I wrote this story out just like I would from my 40 years of business, where everything that you do in business is due yesterday. Emergency, you know, get the facts, analyze, get the bottom line, go and act. And so I gave my document to a teacher at Leslie College, writing teacher, and she gave it back to me and she said, you know what you have here? It's a business report. It's not a story. You have no idea what you're doing. And so after fiddling with it for some more time on my own, I found Grub Street, which is a creative writing center in Boston, and I started taking classes. And I ended up taking a one-year program. I was retired by then. So it was so intense. I didn't go out. I didn't answer my door. I didn't do anything except work in that class for a solid year. And that's where I seriously started writing my memoir.
So you can say you're retired, huh?
Yeah, there were people there who had full-time jobs, and I had no idea how they kept up with the pace. There was so much work.
So I do want to wrap up here. We have a couple of contentious questions here, and I want to ask you, but answer only how much you're comfortable with, because it is kind of getting outside of things. Okay. And so I think this is a question. And so what the person is saying is, are Black Lives Matter Marxists and communists? Why would you support this and just say all lives matter? So I guess to distill it, Black Lives versus all lives matter debate. It's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Can you read the part about communists and Marx and whatever?
So I believe they're either asking or flat out stating that they believe that Black Lives Matter activists are Marxists and communists.
Oh. Interesting. Well, I don't know where they got that idea because I'm not. And the people that I know that are working on Black Lives Matter are not either communists or Marxists. The reason that Black Lives Matter is a singular effort is because of the history of Black people in this country. Let me give you another example from my book. After reuniting with my white family, I went back and searched my white ancestry. And what I found was not as far back as what I could find on my Black side, but there was a very clear distinction. There were immigrants who came from the British Isles. They were craftspeople. They chose to come to America. They built their businesses and plied their crafts, saved their money, bought their homes. One of them was a banker, my great-grandfather on my mother's side, lived in a fancy house, spent beyond his means and came to ruin, but at one point prospered quite a bit. Contrasted with my Black people who came here unwillingly, captured, and brought here in slavery, in chains, where they earned nothing for 400 years. Then we had Jim Crow and Reconstruction and all of that period where whatever Black people tried to achieve was beat down. There was redlining. You couldn't buy a house in a good neighborhood. You were confined to a ghetto. You couldn't get a job. White people only hire white people. You could only be the janitor. On the street that I grew up in Buffalo, we had a Black man who was an accountant by training, carried all the credentials of a CPA, that worked at the flour mill because nobody would hire him as an accountant. These atrocities have gone on forever. And that's why the Boston Globe shows the accumulation of income disparities over generation after generation for hundreds of years amounts to Black people not having accumulated any wealth and white people having accumulated wealth. Even, let me point out, at the end of World War II, the great GI Bill was granted, which gave FHA loans to buy your first home and free college educations to white GIs. Black people didn't. Black GIs got nothing. That is on the economic front. We can talk about civil rights. If we want to go back all through history, I could paint you a similar picture on health disparities, on housing, on education. We can go on here all night as to why Black Lives Matter is a singular effort in which we must focus on eradicating the disparities. Do I think all lives matter? In general, I do, but that's not what I'm working on.
Right, not the point. Yeah, there was another comment here that said the Irish were also slaves. I just wanted to mention it because, of course, Black people don't have a monopoly on slaves, but the institution of chattel slavery in America pales in comparison to anything else, right? It's just,
I'm not sure that Irish people were ever slaves in America. Some of them were indentured servants.
Sure, right,
which was a voluntary act. I'll come to America and work for you for X years in exchange for certain rights and privileges. And let me say this about colorism and race in America. The Irish came here, the Italians came here, the Jews came here. They were not white people when they got here. They were Italians and they were Irish. Go to Europe now. People will tell you, I'm Swiss, I'm German. They don't say to you, I'm white. White was invented in America in order to keep a superiority over people of color. Learn your history and you will find that in spades no matter what it is that you read. So if Irish people chose to come here and signed up to be indentured servants, I regret that they were discriminated against just like Italians and Jews were, but they were not captured, torn from their families, given other names, lost their language, and made to work for 400 years for free. The Irish did not suffer that.
Absolutely. So one more challenging question, maybe. Should we defund the police because of Black Lives Lost?
I think that the police have exhibited a tremendous disregard for overstepping the decency of how they should treat people. And I think that police reform is in order. How many Black people, unarmed Black people, need to be killed by the police for us to agree that there's something wrong here? Now, defunding the police is a term that has a lot of different interpretations, but I want police reform. I don't want to read about another Black person being shot when they could have been arrested, or Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging through a white neighborhood in Georgia, murdered, and he hadn't done anything. And that was a vigilante that did that. So let us, please, people, try to come to a more civilized approach to how we serve the public in the police force.
Well said. We're kind of getting spammed, I guess you could say, in the Q&A. People missing the point about the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not going to dignify them by asking their questions. Instead, I'm going to relay messages about how amazing your story is. Thank you so much for writing it. Thank you so much for being here. And we have another kind of question is there any independent bookstores that you would like the attendees to patron in order to buy your book?
Well, a good question. Of course, independent bookstores are great. Many of them are closed. You can order for curbside pickup. There is a Black bookstore in Roxbury if you want to be an ally. Frugal Bookstore in Roxbury is taking orders and sending out books. And if you want to buy Say I'm Dead, it's also available online at any place that books are sold.
Well said. Well said. So did you have anything else you want to share before I let you go?
I'm really sorry about the contention in the chat. That's not my purpose. I'm here to try to educate the public on what the racial situation has been in my life and draw some parallels to our future and how we can look for hope. And I hope that folks who have other opinions might consider that. But I thank you very much, Wilmington Library, for having me. It's been great to talk with you, Brad.
Yes.
And if anyone wants to contact me regarding a reading for an organization, another library, a book club, you can reach me on my website, www.edoloresjohnson.com.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of your book tour as it is through Zoom or whatnot.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.